Michael Carter's hand shot across the table and knocked the sandwich clean out of the old man's fingers right before it reached his lips. The plate shattered on the marble floor of the most exclusive airline lounge in Denver. 200 people turned to stare, and the manager, screaming for security, had no idea she was about to lose everything because the troublemaker she was throwing out owned the building she was standing in. Here's the twist that makes this whole story worth watching to the end. Michael didn't come to that lounge as an owner. He came dressed like a nobody carrying his little girl's backpack because 3 days earlier he'd read a report that broke his heart. What he found behind those velvet doors was worse than fraud. It was something that made grown men stop believing they deserved to be treated like human beings. Before we go on, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story travels. And if you believe a man should be judged by how he treats people who can't fight back, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one lands. The doors of the Sky Haven Executive Lounge slid open at 6:14 in the morning, and the man who walked through them looked like he'd wandered in by mistake. He wore a gray jacket with a coffee stain near the left pocket. His boots were scuffed. Over one shoulder he carried a child's backpack, pink, with a cartoon fox stitched onto the front flap. In his hand was a boarding pass he'd printed at a kiosk 20 minutes earlier, the paper already soft from being folded and unfolded. His name was Michael Carter. He was 38 years old, and 40 minutes ago he had knelt in the drop-off lane outside an elementary school and told an 8-year-old girl named Emily that yes, he'd be home Friday, and yes, he'd bring the book she wanted, and no, he would not forget cross his heart. She had hugged him around the neck so hard he'd had to peel her arms off. "Be good, Bug," he'd whispered. "You be good," she'd shot back because that was their thing. That backpack on his shoulder was hers. She'd handed it to him at the last second. "So you don't miss me," and he hadn't had the heart to give it back. So now he carried a pink fox through the most expensive airport lounge in Colorado, and he didn't care who saw. The woman at the front desk saw. Her name tag read, Rachel Monroe, Lounge Director, and she looked at Michael the way a person looks at a stain on a white couch. "Can I help you?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was a wall. Michael slid the boarding pass across the counter. "Morning. Just checking in." Rachel didn't touch it. She glanced at the paper, the way you'd glance at something a dog dragged in, then lifted her eyes back to his face. "This lounge is members only, sir." "I know. Founder tier and above." "I know that too." She let a silence hang there waiting for him to fold. People folded. That was the whole system. You made them feel small enough fast enough, and they backed out the door, apologizing for the inconvenience of their own existence. Michael didn't back out. He picked up the boarding pass, held it a half-second longer than necessary, then set it down again, flat deliberate, directly under the scanner mounted on her desk. "Why don't you go ahead and scan it?" he said. Quiet, even. "That's what it's for." Something flickered across Rachel's face. Annoyance mostly. But underneath it, the first small crack of doubt. Men who dressed like Michael didn't usually talk like Michael. They apologized. They shrank. This one just stood there with a pink backpack and a calm that didn't match the coffee stain. She scanned it. The little machine beeped, and the screen turned green, and a line of text appeared that made her lean in and read it twice. VIP Founder Access Approved, Tier 0. Rachel had worked that desk for 3 years. She had never once seen Tier 0. That's... She stopped. Recovered. Put the wall back up brick by brick. "That's an unusual designation. I'll need a second form of ID." "You have my boarding pass." It cleared. "Company policy." "Whose company?" The question landed strange. Rachel blinked. "The lounge's policy, sir. Sky Haven's." Michael nodded slowly, like a man filing something away. He reached into the coffee-stained jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and slid a driver's license across the counter. Colorado. His photo. His name. Michael J. Carter. Rachel looked at it. Looked at him. Nothing about the name meant anything to her, and that more than anything else that morning told Michael everything he needed to know. Because his name was on the incorporation papers of the company that signed her paychecks. It was on the lease of the building she stood in. It was etched into a small brass plaque at the corporate headquarters 2 states away, under 3 words, founder and chairman. And the lounge director of his flagship location had no idea who he was. Good, he thought. That's exactly why I'm here. 3 days earlier, Michael had been sitting at his kitchen table at 11 at night, a mug of cold tea beside him, reading a quarterly performance report he almost hadn't opened. Emily had been asleep down the hall. The house was quiet, in the way houses get quiet after a child finally stops asking for one more glass of water. Michael had built his whole life around that. Quiet had in fact walked away from the 80-hour weeks and the corner office after his wife died, because a little girl needed a father more than a company needed a chairman. He didn't run the day-to-day anymore. He had people for that. Good people, he'd always believed. But that night, the report had a number in it that didn't sit right. The Denver Lounge, his first location, the one he'd opened with money he barely had back when the whole idea was a gamble, scribbled on a napkin, was posting a customer satisfaction score of 99.4%. Nobody scored 99.4%. Not honestly. Not for months on end. Michael had spent 20 years in aviation service. He knew what a real satisfaction score looked like. It breathed it, dipped it, climbed. A perfect number wasn't excellence. A perfect number was a lie wearing a suit. So he'd scroll down, and down, into the complaint logs, the ones that were supposed to feed the score. And that's where the floor dropped out. There were complaints, dozens of them. But every single one had been marked resolved and closed within an hour of being filed. No notes, no follow-up, no record of what resolved even meant. Guest reseated without explanation. Resolved. Guest reported food smelled off. Resolved. Elderly guest reported staff ignored request for assistance. Resolved. Guest asked why menu differed from advertised offerings. Resolved. He'd read them until 2 in the morning. And the more he read, the more a cold familiar dread crept up his spine, because he'd seen this pattern before, years ago at a different company, and by the time anyone caught it, a customer had ended up in the hospital. The next morning, he'd made 2 phone calls. The first was to Daniel Hayes, the head of internal controls, a man Michael trusted more than almost anyone alive. He'd told Daniel to quietly assemble an audit team and be ready to move on his signal. The second call he'd made to himself in the mirror without saying a word out loud. Don't announce it. Don't warn them. Don't send an email that gives them 3 days to clean up. Go see it the way a customer sees it. With no name. With no power. With nothing but a boarding pass and a pink backpack. See how they treat the man they think can't fight back. Right this way, Mr. Carter? Rachel had recovered her professional smile, the plastic one, the one that didn't reach her eyes, and she led him past the main floor of the lounge. And the main floor was beautiful. Michael would give her that. Soft light. Real leather chairs, the color of caramel. A chef in a white coat carving something behind a glass counter, while jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Businessmen in $5,000 suits sipped espresso and tapped at laptops, and every one of them had a server hovering nearby, refilling, adjusting, anticipating. It looked exactly like the brochure, exactly like the vision Michael had scribbled on that napkin 15 years ago. A place where people are treated like they matter. But Rachel didn't stop there. She walked him past the good chairs, past the chef, past the businessmen, toward a door at the back marked in small brass letters, Quiet Area. We find some guests prefer a calmer environment, she said over her shoulder, her heels clicking. Less foot traffic, more privacy. Michael said nothing. He followed. And when the door opened, he understood the whole scheme in a single glance. The Quiet Area was not calmer. It was not private. It was a converted storage room with the shelving pulled out and a dozen mismatched tables shoved in. The chairs were plastic. The light was fluorescent and flickering. There were no servers. There was no jazz. There was a vending machine humming in the corner and a single water cooler with a handwritten sign taped to it, 1 cup per guest. And there were people in there. Real people. Maybe 15 of them. An old man in a veteran's cap hunched over a paper plate. A young mother bouncing a fussing baby with one arm while she tried to eat with the other. A man in a wheelchair parked in a corner because there was nowhere better to put him. A woman in a hijab reading a paperback with the patient stillness of someone who had learned long ago not to expect much. Every single one of them had a VIP boarding pass. Michael could see the gold trim on the passes sitting on their tables. They had paid for the same access as the men in the leather chairs, and they'd been herded into a storage closet. Michael felt something start to burn low in his chest. He kept his face flat. "This is fine," he said. "Thank you." Rachel smiled that plastic smile. "Someone will be with you shortly." Nobody came with him shortly. Nobody came at all. He sat at a wobbling table near the old veteran and watched. That was the thing Michael was good at. He could sit in a room and go so still that people forgot he was there, and then the room would show him its truth. The truth that morning came fast. A server finally appeared after 19 minutes. Michael timed it, a nervous young woman in a gray apron who moved like she was afraid of being yelled at. Her name tag read Clara. She carried a tray of pre-wrapped food and set the plates down without a word, moving fast, avoiding eyes. The old veteran in the cap looked up. "Miss, could I get some coffee? Real coffee, not the machine." Clara hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the door to the main floor, like she was checking whether someone was watching. I'm sorry, sir," she said. "The coffee service is for the main lounge. There's the water cooler." The old man's face didn't crumble. That was the part that got Michael. It didn't crumble because it had done this before. He just nodded slow and said, "Course. My mistake. My mistake." An old veteran apologizing for wanting a cup of coffee in a lounge he'd paid to enter. Michael's jaw tightened. Clara set a plate in front of the veteran. A sandwich wrapped in plastic. She set another in front of the young mother. She got to Michael's table and put one down for him too, and for a half second her eyes met his, and Michael saw something in them he recognized. Shame. Not the flat shame of a person doing wrong and knowing it. Something worse. The trapped shame of a person doing wrong because they were afraid of what happened if they didn't. "Thank you, Clara," Michael said quietly. She startled, like being thanked was so unusual it registered as a threat. You're welcome, sir." She hurried off. Michael looked down at the plate in front of him. The sandwich was wrapped in plastic, but the plastic was fogged with condensation on the inside, and the bread beneath it had a gray tint at the edges. Beside it sat a small clear cup of cut fruit melon mostly, and the melon was pooled in its own liquid gone soft. The sharp edges of the cubes rounded off the way fruit gets when it's been sitting a long, long time. There was no date sticker on the fruit. There was no date sticker on anything. Michael didn't eat. He picked the sandwich up, turned it over, and brought it close enough to smell. And the smell told him everything. It was faint, but it was there. That sweet, sour wrongness, the smell of something that had crossed a line hours ago. Something that should have been in a dumpster instead of on a plate in front of a paying human being. He set it down, very gently. And he looked around the room at 15 people about to eat the exact same thing. That's when the young mother 3 tables over spoke up. "Excuse me." She was holding the sandwich half unwrapped. The baby had finally gone quiet against her shoulder. "I'm sorry, does this smell okay to you? I don't want to be difficult. It smells a little funny, and I'm nursing, so I have to be careful." Michael opened his mouth, but Rachel got there first. She'd appeared in the doorway. Had she been standing there the whole time, and she crossed the room with quick clicking steps, that professional smile stretched tight across her face. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "No, it's probably nothing. The sandwich just smells a little. Our food is prepared fresh daily and held to the highest safety standards." Rachel said it fast, smooth, a sentence she'd clearly said 100 times. "I can assure you there's nothing wrong with it. But if you'd prefer, there's the vending machine." The mother looked at the vending machine, looked at the sandwich, looked at her baby. "No," she said quietly. "It's fine. I'm sure it's fine." And she started to bring the sandwich back to her mouth. Michael was already half out of his chair. But it wasn't her. He stopped. It was the old man. Because in the corner of his eye, Michael had seen the veteran in the cap reach for his own sandwich, And Michael had also seen on the table beside the old man a weekly pill organizer, the plastic kind with a compartment for each day. And the Wednesday slot was open and empty, and there was a glass of water sweating beside it. The old man was going to take his medication. And you didn't take that kind of medication on an empty stomach. So he was going to eat first. He was going to eat the sandwich first. "Sir." Michael's chair scraped. "Sir, wait, don't." The old man had already lifted it, already opened his mouth. Michael crossed the distance in 2 strides and knocked it out of his hand. The plate hit the floor and shattered. The sandwich skidded across the tile. The whole room went dead silent, every fork frozen, every eye locked on the man in the coffee-stained jacket with the pink fox backpack still slung across his shoulder, breathing hard, his hand still extended in the air where he'd struck the food away. The old man stared up at him, stunned. "I'm sorry," Michael said, and his voice cracked on it. "I'm sorry. I couldn't let you eat that. It's not safe. It smelled wrong and you were about to take your medication and I couldn't let you." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rachel's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Security." It happened fast after that, the way these things always do. Rachel was on him before the echo faded, her plastic smile, gone, replaced by something hard and cornered. "Sir, you need to leave, right now." "That food is spoiled," Michael said. He kept his voice level, but there was steel under it now. "I smelled it." He smelled it. He gestured at the mother. She smelled it. "There's no date on any of it. You're serving expired food to people who paid full price for. You are frightening my guests." Rachel's voice rose sharp and shaking. "You knocked food out of an elderly man's hands. You've been sitting here staring at people for half an hour. I don't know what your problem is, but you are done here." "My problem," Michael said, "is that a man was about to get sick because your kitchen is a fraud." A ripple went through the room. The young mother looked down at the sandwich in her own hand and very slowly set it on the table like it might bite her. Rachel saw it, saw the room starting to tip. And that's when she made her mistake, the mistake Michael would remember for a long time, because it wasn't a mistake of a person who'd panicked. It was a mistake of a person who genuinely believed she'd win. "You know what your problem really is," she said loud enough for the whole room, her lip curling. "People like you get one VIP pass and think you own the place. You come in here in your dirty jacket with a child's backpack, you don't belong in this tier, and you're trying to make a scene so you feel important. It's pathetic. Security's going to walk you out, and you can file all the complaints you want. Nobody's going to listen to a man like you." Michael went very still. "People like you. A man like you." There it was. The whole rotten heart of the thing said out loud in front of everyone. Not just spoiled food and flickering lights and a storage closet lounge. A belief. A belief that certain people didn't deserve to be safe, didn't deserve to be heard, didn't deserve the same sandwich as the man in the leather chair. "Nobody's going to listen to a man like you." 2 security guards pushed through the door, big men, uniformed, radios crackling. Rachel pointed at Michael like she was pointing at a fire. "Escort this man out. He assaulted a guest and refuses to leave." The guards moved toward him. Michael didn't step back. He didn't raise his hands. He looked at Rachel, and for the first time that morning, something like sorrow crossed his face, not for himself, for her. "You really don't know," he said quietly. "Do you know what?" And that's when the door at the far end of the room opened. The man who walked in did not look like the men in the leather chairs. He looked like a machine. Charcoal suit, no tie, a tablet under one arm, and an ID badge clipped to his lapel. Behind him came 4 more people in matching windbreakers, and across the back of every windbreaker were 3 words in white block letters: Sky Haven Compliance. The lead man's eyes swept the room once, the flickering lights, the plastic chairs, the water cooler with its handwritten sign, the shattered plate, the fruit gone soft in its cups, and Michael watched the man's face harden into something cold. Then he found Michael, and everything about him changed. He stopped. He straightened. And he said in a clear, carrying voice that reached every corner of that silent room, "Mr. Carter, the audit team is in position. We came the moment you gave the signal." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Michael had ever heard. Rachel's face did something Michael would never forget. It went through 3 stages in about 2 seconds. First confusion, then dawning, then a kind of horror so complete it drained the color from her face like a plug pulled from a drain. The 2 security guards stopped mid-step. The old veteran looked up from where he sat, and Daniel Hayes, head of internal controls, the man Michael had called 3 nights ago at his kitchen table, crossed the room and stood beside Michael and said loud enough for all of them, "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the disruption. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Sky Haven." He turned just slightly toward the man in the coffee-stained jacket with the pink backpack. "And this is Michael Carter. He's the founder and chairman of this company. He owns the lounge you're sitting in." Nobody breathed. Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Michael looked at her, at the woman who 90 seconds ago had told him nobody would ever listen to a man like him. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. His voice, when it came, was so quiet the whole room had to lean in to catch it. "You asked me who I was 3 times this morning," Michael said. "You made me show you a boarding pass. You made me show you a license. And you still walked me back here to this room, and you served me the exact same food you serve every one of these people." His hand swept the room. "Because you looked at my jacket and my daughter's backpack, and you decided I was nobody." He took 1 step toward her. "You want to know the worst part, Rachel? If I'd walked in wearing a $10,000 suit, you'd have sat me in the good chairs. You'd have brought me real coffee. You'd have made sure my food was fresh. The only thing that changed how you treated me, the only thing was what you thought I couldn't do to you." Rachel's mouth trembled. "Mr. Carter, there's been a misunderstanding. I would never—" "Don't." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Don't lie to me in front of these people. They've been lied to enough." He turned away from her. He looked at the old veteran in the cap, at the young mother clutching her baby, at the man in the wheelchair, in the corner at Clara, frozen in the doorway, with her tray still in her hands and tears standing in her eyes. And Michael Carter said the only thing left to say. He looked at Daniel Hayes. "Shut it down," he said. "All of it. Right now." Daniel nodded once and lifted his tablet. "You heard the chairman. Effective immediately, this location is closed pending full audit. Nobody serves another plate of food until my team clears this kitchen." He turned to the compliance officers behind him. "Seal the kitchen. Pull every log, every invoice, every camera. And find me whoever's in charge of food procurement." At the mention of procurement, a door at the back, the one that led to the kitchen, swung open, and a man in a supervisor's polo took 2 steps out, saw the windbreakers, saw Michael, saw Rachel's ashen face, and stopped cold. His name tag read, "David Brooks Operations." For 1 long moment, David Brooks stood there with his hand still on the door, and Michael watched the man calculate. Watched him try to figure out whether he could still lie his way out of this, whether there was some version of the next 5 minutes where he walked away clean. Then David Brooks did the thing that told Michael he was guilty as sin. He ran. He turned and bolted back through the kitchen door, and 2 of the compliance officers went after him, and somewhere back there, a metal cart crashed over, and the whole storage closet lounge erupted into noise and movement. But Michael didn't move. He stood in the middle of it, the founder in the coffee-stained jacket, the pink fox backpack still on his shoulder, and he walked calmly to where the old veteran sat. He crouched down beside the old man's chair, so they were eye to eye. "I'm sorry I knocked that out of your hands," Michael said. "I didn't have a gentler way to stop you in time." The old man looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were wet and clear, the eyes of a man who'd seen a lot in his life, and knew the real thing when it sat down in front of him. "Son," he said, "my wife passed 2 years back. Since then, seems like the whole world decided I'd stopped mattering. People talk over me, look through me. This morning that gal told me I couldn't have a cup of coffee in a place I paid good money to sit in, and you know what I did? I apologized to her." He shook his head slowly. "First time in a long time, somebody looked at me like I was still worth protecting." He reached out and gripped Michael's forearm with a hand that was stronger than it looked. "You knock 100 sandwiches out of my hand, I don't care. Thank you." Michael's throat tightened. He couldn't speak for a second. He just nodded and put his own hand over the old man's. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Walt. Walter Briggs." "Walt." Michael stood slowly. "You give my daughter Emily a run for her money. She's the only other person who's ever outstubborned me." The old man let out a rough, surprised laugh. "You got a little girl." Michael reached up and touched the strap of the pink backpack on his shoulder, and something in his face softened all the way down. "Yeah," he said. "That's kind of the whole reason I'm standing here, Walt." And across the room, Rachel Monroe sank into one of the plastic chairs, put her face in her hands, and understood too late, far too late, that the man she'd tried to throw out of a storage closet had come there for exactly one reason: to find out what happened to the people the world had decided didn't matter, and to make it stop. The compliance officers came back through the kitchen door 2 minutes later with David Brooks between them, and he wasn't running anymore. He was talking. That was the first thing Michael noticed. Guilty men who get caught always start talking, and Brooks was talking fast, words tumbling out of him before anyone had even asked him a question. "This is a misunderstanding, Mr. Carter. Whatever Rachel told you, whatever you think you saw, I can explain all of it. The food safety logs are current. I signed them myself this morning. I don't know what happened with that one sandwich, but one bad unit slips through. It happens at every location. You know that you built these places." "Stop." Michael didn't raise his voice. Brooks stopped. "Daniel," Michael said, "have your people pulled the invoices yet?" Daniel Hayes was already scrolling on his tablet. "Working on it, but we've got something faster." He turned the tablet around so Michael could see it. "The kitchen has a walk-in cooler with a digital temperature log. It's supposed to hold at 34 degrees. It's been sitting at 51 for 6 days. The room made a sound. A low, ugly murmur that rolled through all 15 people in that storage closet lounge because they understood what 51 degrees meant, even if they couldn't have said it in a food safety class. 51 degrees meant the fruit going soft in the cups. 51 degrees meant the gray edge on the bread. 51 degrees meant the smell. Brooks's face went the color of the fruit. "That cooler's been on the maintenance schedule," he said. "We reported it. It's a facilities issue. It's not on me." "You reported it." Daniel didn't look up from the tablet. "To who?" "To corporate, weeks ago." "There's no ticket." Daniel finally raised his eyes. "There's no email. There's no work order. I've got my team searching every system we have right now, and there is no record anywhere that anyone reported a broken cooler. You want to try that answer again?" Brooks opened his mouth, closed it, and Michael watched a thing happen that he'd seen too many times in 20 years of running companies. He watched a man realize the story he'd been telling himself for months was about to become the story a room full of strangers told about him for the rest of his life. "I want to talk to my lawyer," Brooks said. "You'll get to," Michael said. "But you're going to do it somewhere else because you're not standing in my lounge one more minute." He turned to the compliance officers. "Get him out of here, not through the front. These people have seen enough of him." They walked David Brooks out through a service corridor, and the storage closet lounge let out a breath it had been holding for what felt like an hour. Michael turned back to the room. 15 faces looked at him, and he understood that he was right now, in this moment, the most powerful person in the building, and possibly the most exhausted. Because knocking a sandwich out of an old man's hand had taken something out of him, and finding out the cooler had been broken for 6 days had taken something more. But he wasn't done. He was nowhere near done. And the person he needed next was standing in the doorway with a tray still in her hands, crying so quietly she wasn't making any sound at all. "Clara," Michael said. She flinched at her own name. "Clara, come here a second." She didn't move. Her eyes went to Rachel, who was still sitting collapsed in the plastic chair, and Michael saw the whole thing in that one glance. Saw that Clara had spent every shift for months looking at Rachel before she was allowed to do anything, and even now, even with Rachel finished, the reflex was still wired into her. "You don't have to look at her," Michael said gently. "She's not in charge of anything anymore. Look at me." Clara looked at him. "Set the tray down," he said. "You don't have to carry that." She set it down on the nearest table like it weighed 200 pounds, and then her hands were empty, and she didn't know what to do with them, so she pressed them together in front of her. "How long have you worked here?" Michael asked. 8 months. Her voice was barely there. "And how long have you known the food back here wasn't right?" Clara's face crumpled. "Please don't fire me. Please. I have a little brother. I'm all he's got. I can't if I lose this job." "Clara." Michael took a step closer, and he crouched a little the way he had with the old man, the way he did with Emily when she was scared, bringing himself down under her eye line so she didn't have to look up at him. "Clara, listen to me very carefully. I am not going to fire you. I need you to hear that. I am not firing you." She stared at him like the words didn't compute. "I read the complaint logs 3 nights ago," Michael went on. "Every single one of them was marked resolved by a manager. But before they got closed, some of them got filed. And a few of those—" He glanced at Daniel, who nodded and pulled something up. "A few of those came from an employee, not a customer. An employee reported that the cold storage smelled wrong. An employee reported that guests in the quiet area were getting different food than the menu promised. That employee filed 4 separate reports over 2 months, and every one of them was closed within the hour, with no action." He looked back at her. "That was you, wasn't it, Clara?" The tears came faster now. She nodded once and put her hand over her mouth. "They told me to stop," she whispered. "Rachel told me if I kept filing complaints, I'd be marked as a problem employee, and I'd be the first one cut. She said nobody upstairs cared that the reports just went into a folder. Nobody read." Her voice broke completely. "I thought nobody read them. I thought I was screaming into a wall." "I read them," Michael said. 3 words. "And Clara Reyes, 23 years old, sole guardian of a little brother who had spent 2 months screaming into what she thought was a wall, put both hands over her face and sobbed. Not the quiet kind anymore, the real kind. The kind that comes out of a person when they find out against all evidence that they were heard." Michael stood up and let her cry. He didn't rush it. Some things you don't rush. And Rachel Monroe watched the whole thing from her plastic chair, and something in her face was starting to shift from horror into something else. Because she'd just watched the founder of the company crouch down in front of a server she'd spent months threatening, and she'd watched him tell that server she was safe, and Rachel was beginning to do the math on what that meant for a manager who had done the threatening. "Mr. Carter." Rachel's voice was different now. Careful. Rehearsed already in the 90 seconds she'd had to build it. "I want you to know that I was following procedures that were handed down to me. The tiered seating, the quiet area, that was operational policy before I ever got here. I inherited a system. I was doing my job." Michael turned to look at her slow. "You inherited a system," he repeated. "Yes." "Show me the policy." Rachel blinked. It's not written down exactly. It's more of an understood. It's not written down." Michael nodded. "Because it doesn't exist. Because I would never in 100 years sign off on a policy that stuffs veterans and nursing mothers into a converted storage closet and serves them expired fruit. So you didn't inherit that, Rachel. Somebody built it, right here. And I'm looking at the manager who ran it every single day." "David built it," Rachel said instantly. "David Brooks. The procurement, the substitutions, all of it was David. I just managed the floor." And there it was. Michael had wondered how long it would take, and the answer was about 4 minutes. The second the ship started sinking, everybody grabbed for the same lifeboat, and the lifeboat was named David Brooks. "You just managed the floor," Michael said. "Yes. So when Walt over there asked you for a cup of coffee this morning, and you told him no, that was procurement's fault too." Rachel's mouth opened and shut. "When you looked at my daughter's backpack and decided I was nobody and walked me back into a storage room. Was that David Brooks's decision or yours?" "Mr. Carter." "When Clara filed 4 reports and you told her she'd be the first one fired, was that the cold storage temperature or was that you?" Rachel had no answer, because there wasn't one. And Michael watched her understand that too. "Here's what I know about you already. Rachel and I've known you for about 40 minutes. Michael's voice stayed level, and somehow that was worse than shouting. "You didn't break the cooler. You didn't forge the invoices. What you did was smaller than that. and in some ways worse. You looked at a room full of human beings every single morning, and you decided which ones were worth being kind to. And you got so good at it so fast, so automatic, that you did it to the man who signs your paychecks without even blinking. He shook his head slowly. That's not a policy you inherited. That's just who you decided to be when you thought nobody who mattered was watching. The room was dead quiet. Even Clara had gone still. And then a voice came from the corner, the man in the wheelchair. "Can I say something?" Every head turned. He was younger than Walt, maybe 50, with the kind of steady voice that made people listen. "Go ahead," Michael said. "I've been coming through this lounge twice a month for 2 years," the man said. "Denver to Chicago and back, medical stuff doesn't matter. And every single time they park me in this back room. Every time. I got a card that says the same thing as the guys in the leather chairs out there. And I stopped saying anything about it a long time ago because you say something once, you get a smile and an apology and nothing changes, and you say it twice, you're the difficult one." He looked at Rachel, not with anger, just a tired kind of clarity. "You want to know how good her system was? It was so good I forgot to be angry about it. I just figured this was where I went. This was my spot. The back room. That's a hell of a thing to do to a person, make them forget they're allowed to be angry." Michael felt that one land in his chest like a stone, because that was it. That was the thing he'd been trying to name since 2 in the morning 3 nights ago, reading complaint after complaint marked resolved. It wasn't the fraud. The fraud was just money, and money he could fix. It was that they had taken a room full of people, and slowly, quietly, one small indignity at a time, taught them to expect less. Taught them that the back room was their spot. Taught them to apologize for wanting coffee. Taught them they didn't matter. "What's your name?" Michael asked the man. "Ray. Ray, I'm going to say something to this whole room, and I need every one of you to actually hear it because I don't think anybody's said it to you in a long time." Michael turned so he was facing all of them, the veteran and the young mother and the woman with her paperback and Ray in his chair and the rest. "You were right. Every time you felt like something was wrong in here, you were right. It wasn't in your head. You weren't being difficult. You weren't imagining that you were being treated like less. You were being treated like less. On purpose. By people who decided you wouldn't fight back." He let that sit for a second. "And I am so sorry it took the owner walking in with a coffee stain on his jacket for anybody to believe you. Nobody said anything." The young mother was crying now, quietly holding her baby. And it was the young mother who Michael turned to next, because there was something he had to check, and he'd been dreading it since the moment she'd almost brought that sandwich to her mouth. "Ma'am, you said you were nursing. Did you eat any of it before all this? Any at all?" She shook her head fast. No, I was about to when I didn't." Michael let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Okay, good. "But," her voice shook, "my son, he's 4. He's over there." She pointed, and Michael turned, and for the first time he saw the little boy, maybe 4 years old, sitting quietly at the next table with a juice box and a half-eaten cup of the soft fruit in front of him. He was eating the fruit. He had some. Izzy was that? And the whole room's stomach dropped at once. Michael was moving before he'd decided to move. He crossed to the little boy's table and crouched down and looked at the fruit cup. And the fruit was the same as his, had been soft and pooling and undated, and the little boy had eaten maybe half of it, and he was looking up at Michael with the total unconcern of a 4-year-old who has no idea anything is wrong. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, gentle, careful to keep the fear out of his voice. "What's your name?" "Leo." "Leo, that's a great name. Hey, how's your tummy feeling?" "Leo, feel okay?" Leo shrugged and picked up his juice box. Michael turned to Daniel, and his voice had changed, gone tight and fast. "Daniel, is there medical in this terminal? Airport has a clinic near Gate C, and EMS can be here in..." "Get EMS, now. I want a paramedic to look at this boy before anybody so much as breathes wrong, and I want them to look at anyone else who ate the fruit. I'm not gambling with a 4-year-old on probably fine." Daniel was already on his radio. The young mother had crossed to her son and gathered him into her lap, and she was holding it together, the way mothers do, holding it together for the kid's sake, while her own hands shook, and Michael crouched next to both of them. "Listen to me," he said quietly just to her. He ate a little soft fruit. "Most likely he's completely fine, and in 20 minutes a paramedic is going to tell us that, and we're all going to feel silly for worrying. Okay, but we're going to check. Because that's what should happen. That's what should have happened the first time you said the sandwich smelled funny. Somebody should have said, 'Okay, let's check,' instead of pointing you at a vending machine." He put a hand on Leo's small shoulder. "You did everything right. You asked the question. You were right to ask. This is not on you. Do you understand me? None of this is on you." She nodded, and the tears came, and she pressed her face into the top of her son's head. And behind Michael, Rachel Monroe stood up from her plastic chair. "I want to help," she said. "With the boy. I know CPR, I have first aid certification, I can—" Michael stood and turned to face her, and for a moment the whole room braced, because they'd all watched this woman spend the morning being cruel, and now here she was offering to help, and everyone wanted to see what the founder would do with that. Michael looked at her for a long, long moment. "No," he said, "not cruel, not loud, just final. You want to help now because now there's a 4-year-old and a crowd and the owner watching. This morning, when it was just you and Clara and a broken cooler and nobody with power in the room, you had 100 chances to help. You could have told me the fruit was bad. You could have told Walt to have the coffee. You could have picked up the phone about that cooler yourself instead of counting on David to bury it. You didn't help when helping was hard and quiet and nobody would ever have known. So I'm not going to let you help now that it's easy and loud." He shook his head. "Sit down, Rachel. Just sit down." She sat down. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. Michael counted every one of them, 2 of them with a bag, and they knelt down next to Leo and did the calm, thorough, unhurried things that paramedics do. And Michael stood a few feet back with his arms crossed and watched their faces, instead of watching the boy, because you learn more from the faces. And after 4 or 5 minutes, one of the paramedics looked up at the mother and said the words Michael had been praying for. "He's fine. Vitals are perfect, belly's soft. He's happy as a clam. Soft fruit's not going to do much even if it was past its prime. Worst case, he'd have gotten a tummy ache tonight. But you did right calling us. Better to know." The young mother made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and she hugged her son so hard he said, "Mom, ow." And everyone in the room let go of the breath they'd been holding for 7 minutes, and somewhere near the back. Walt the veteran took off his cap and rubbed his face with a shaking hand. Michael closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. And then he opened them and got back to work, because a founder who lets himself sit in relief is a founder who misses the next thing, and there was always a next thing. The next thing walked in the door. How was a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, red in the face, and he came in from the main floor with a phone in his hand and an entitled fury in his eyes, and he did not read the room. Men like this never read the room. He'd apparently heard there was a disruption, and he'd come to complain about it. "Which one of you is in charge?" he barked. "I've been trying to get a mimosa for 20 minutes, and now there's paramedics and I've got a flight in an hour. This is a VIP lounge. This is unacceptable. I paid for." "You paid for the same card they did," Michael said. The man turned. "Excuse me." Michael pointed at Ray in his wheelchair, at Walt in his cap, at the young mother holding Leo. "Those people, they have the exact same VIP card you have, the exact same one, and they got put in this storage room and served spoiled food while you got a mimosa out front. So before you tell me what's unacceptable, I want you to look at that boy who is 4 years old, who just got checked by a paramedic because this lounge fed him rotten fruit, and I want you to tell me again about your flight." The man in the suit looked at Leo, looked at the paramedics packing up their bag, looked at Ray in his chair, and some of the red drained out of his face. "I didn't know," he said quieter. "No," Michael said. "You didn't. That's the whole point. The people out front never know because the whole thing is built, so you never have to. You get your mimosa, and you never once wonder what's happening on the other side of that door, because why would you? You're comfortable. Comfort doesn't ask questions." Michael's voice softened just slightly. "I'm not blaming you for getting a mimosa, friend. I'm telling you the wall between your side and their side didn't happen by accident. Somebody built it, and I'm the guy who's here to tear it down." The man in the suit stood there for a second. Then he did something that surprised Michael. He walked over to the young mother a little awkward, and he crouched down next to Leo and said, Hey buddy, you like planes?" And Leo nodded, and the man said, "Me too, I fly all the time. You want to know a secret about planes?" And just like that, he was making a 4-year-old laugh, and the mother looked up at him with wet, grateful eyes, and Michael thought, there it is. That's the thing. Take the wall down, and people are mostly just people. He let himself have that one for a second. Then Daniel Hayes came up beside him with the tablet, and his face was grim, and Michael knew the morning was about to get worse. "You need to see this," Daniel said low, just for Michael. The invoices came in. "How bad?" "Bad, but not the way you think." Daniel turned the tablet so only Michael could see. "The premium food, the stuff that's supposed to be served in here, the stuff on the advertised menu, it was ordered and paid for, full price, every month. The invoices are clean." Michael frowned. "Then where did it go?" "That's the thing." Daniel scrolled. "The premium product came in the back door, and then according to these logs it went right back out again. Same day. Sold to a third-party vendor at a discount cash. And the cheap stuff, the stuff they actually served, that came in separate off the books, paid for out of a petty cash account that's been running about $4,000 a month in charges, nobody ever questioned." Michael's jaw tightened as he understood. "So the company paid full price for good food," he said slowly. "The good food got sold out the back for cash into somebody's pocket. And then they bought garbage with a slush fund and served the garbage to our guests. And the diff's the good food minus the garbage. That's the profit somebody's been skimming." "That's the profit somebody's been skimming," Daniel confirmed. "For at least 8 months. Probably longer, I've only pulled 8. "How much?" Daniel looked at him. "Just at this location, conservatively north of $200,000. Michael was quiet for a moment. $200,000. Somebody had made $200,000 by taking food out of the mouths of veterans and nursing mothers and 4-year-olds and selling it out a back door for cash. Somebody had looked at Walt asking for a cup of coffee, and Ray parked in a corner and had seen in all of it an opportunity. David Brooks couldn't have done that alone, Michael said. "No," Daniel said. "He couldn't. Procurement can order it and sign for it, but somebody on the floor had to make sure the premium product went back out the door and the cheap stuff got served without anybody noticing. Somebody who controlled the floor, every day, who decided who got served what." And both of them at the same moment turned and looked at Rachel Monroe. She was still sitting in the plastic chair. And she saw them look, and she saw what was in their faces, and she stood up fast, hands out in front of her. "No," she said. "No, whatever he's telling you, I didn't take any money. I swear to God I never took $1. The seating, yes, fine. The seating was me. I'll own the seating, but I never touched I didn't know about the food going out the back. I swear I didn't. Rachel." Michael's voice cut through it. 10 minutes ago, you told me you inherited a system nobody wrote down. Then you told me it was all David. Now you're telling me you didn't know about the money. Every time I turn around, you knew a little less. I need you to understand something. In about an hour, my forensic team is going to have every transaction in that petty cash account, every cash deposit, every text message on the phone you're holding in your hand right now. So this is the last time I'm going to ask you a question and get to watch your face while you answer it before it stops mattering what your face does." He looked at her steadily. "Did you know the premium food was being sold out the back?" And Michael watched her face. He watched her decide whether to lie one more time. He watched the same calculation David Brooks had made at the kitchen door, flicker behind her eyes. And he watched this time something different happen. He watched her run out of road. "I knew," Rachel said. The room went silent. "I didn't take the money," she said. And now her voice was flat drained, the performance finally gone. "That was David and a guy at the vendor. But I knew. I knew because I was the one who made sure the front room never saw the back room. I ran the floor so the two never touched. That was my—" She laughed a small awful sound. "That was my job. Keep them separate. Keep the comfortable people comfortable, so nobody looked too hard. David gave me a bonus every month. $2,000 cash in an envelope. He called it a performance bonus. I told myself it was for hitting the satisfaction numbers. She looked up and her eyes were wet now, but it wasn't clear even to her what she was crying about. I told myself a lot of things. 2,000 a month, Michael said quietly. To keep the wall up. To keep the wall up, she said. And Michael Carter looked at this woman. This manager who 3 hours ago had made an old veteran apologize for wanting coffee, who had walked the founder of the company into a storage room because of a coffee stain and a child's backpack, who had taken $2,000 a month to make sure the comfortable people never had to see the people in the back, and he did not feel triumph. He'd thought he might. 3 nights ago, at his kitchen table, reading those logs, he'd felt a cold, hard anger, and he'd imagined this moment, and he'd imagined it feeling like winning. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like grief. Daniel, Michael said without taking his eyes off Rachel. Get her statement. On the record. She just gave us most of the case against Brooks and the vendor, and that's going to matter, so make sure it's documented, and make sure she knows it's documented. He finally turned away. And then she's done. Suspended today, terminated by end of week, and everything she just said goes to whoever needs it, prosecutors included. Rachel sat back down. She didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue. And Michael walked away from her toward the front of the storage room, toward Clara, who had been standing this whole time with her empty hands pressed together, watching a woman who had terrorized her for 8 months finally come apart. Clara, Michael said, I need a manager on this floor. Somebody who knows exactly how bad it got in here and won't ever let it get like that again. Somebody who filed 4 reports into what she thought was a wall and filed a 5th one anyway. He looked at her. You're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm looking at her. Clara stared at him. Me? I'm Mr. Carter. I'm a server. I've been here 8 months. I don't know how to... You knew the food was bad when the managers said it was fine. You knew the back room was wrong when the whole system said it was policy. You knew who mattered in this room, and it was never the people with the leather chairs, it was the people nobody was fighting for. Michael's voice was steady and sure. That's the only qualification I actually care about. The rest you can learn. That you already had, and you had it when it cost you something, which is the only time it counts. Clara's eyes filled again, and this time she didn't hide it. I have to think about my brother, she said. I can't take a risk that... It's not a risk. It's a raise a title, and my personal phone number. And the first time anybody makes you feel like you're screaming into a wall again, you call me directly, and I will personally answer. He almost smiled. Ask around. I'm hard to get rid of once I decide you matter. And Clara Reyes, 23, guardian of a little brother who had spent 2 months certain that nobody was listening, put her empty hands over her face for the 2nd time that morning. But this time, when she took them away, she was smiling. Michael turned back to the room one last time, before the real work started, the audits and the statements, and the long, ugly cleanup that he knew was coming. He looked at Walt in his cap, and Ray in his chair, and the young mother with Leo asleep now, against her shoulder, and the businessman who'd come in for a mimosa and stayed to make a 4-year-old laugh. I'm going to close this location for a while, Michael said to all of them. Weeks maybe, long enough to tear the whole thing down to the studs and build it back right. So I owe you all a real apology, and I owe you a way home today, and both of those you're going to get before you leave this room. He paused. But I want to tell you why I actually came here this morning, because I think you've earned the truth more than anybody. They watched him. And Michael Carter reached up and touched the strap of the pink Fox backpack still hanging off his shoulder, the one his 8-year-old daughter had handed him at a school drop-off that felt like a lifetime ago instead of 4 hours. My daughter's name is Emily, he said. She's 8. Her mother passed when she was small, so it's just the 2 of us. And about a year ago, Emily asked me what my job was, and I told her I built places where people wait for their airplanes. And she asked me what was special about them, and I didn't have a good answer. His voice was quiet now, and every person in that room was dead still. So I've been trying to build the answer ever since. A place where people get treated right. Not the rich ones, not the ones in the good suits, everybody. Because that was supposed to be the whole point. He looked around the storage room at the flickering light, and the plastic chairs, and the water cooler with its handwritten sign. And this morning I walked into my own company and found out that somewhere along the way, it turned into the exact opposite of the thing I promised my kid I was building. So no, I didn't get angry when that manager treated me like nobody. I got angry when I realized she'd been treating all of you like nobody for a lot longer than one morning. He nodded slowly to himself, as much as to them. I'm going to fix it. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm going to fix it, and every one of you is going to be able to walk into a Skyhaven lounge for the rest of your lives and be treated exactly like the most important person in the building. Because you are. You always were. Somebody just decided you weren't, and they were wrong, and now they're gone. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Walt the veteran stood up out of his plastic chair, slow his knees, not what they used to be, and he put his cap back on his head, and he looked at Michael, and he brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate salute. And one by one around that awful little room, the people the world had decided didn't matter, got to their feet. The salute lasted maybe 3 seconds, but Michael would carry it for the rest of his life. Then he got Walt and Ray and the young mother and all the rest of them into cars and first-class seats, and in 2 cases hotel rooms and later flights. And he did it himself on his own phone, standing in the middle of that storage room, while Daniel handled the compliance officers, and Clara started learning what it meant to be in charge. He didn't hand it off to an assistant. He wrote down 15 names and 15 destinations on the back of a napkin, and he made sure every single person left that airport better than they'd arrived. And when Walt tried to thank him again, Michael just shook his hand and said, "Go see your family, Walt. That's the whole thing. Go see your family." By 11 that morning, the storage room was empty of guests and full of investigators. And that was when the real trouble started, because David Brooks had lawyered up, and David Brooks's lawyer was good. Michael found out in the corporate office they'd commandeered down the corridor, a windowless room with a conference table where Daniel had set up his laptops. Daniel hung up a phone call and turned around with an expression Michael didn't like. "Brooks isn't talking," Daniel said. His lawyer showed up in person faster than a guy like Brooks should be able to get a lawyer. And the lawyer's already floating a story. What story? That Brooks is a scapegoat. That the substitution scheme came from higher up than him. That he was just following instructions from corporate, and he kept records to prove it, and if we push a criminal case, those records come out. Daniel paused. "He's threatening you, Michael. Personally. The lawyer used your name." Michael sat down slowly. "Me. He's saying you knew. He's saying the founder can't run a clean company for 15 years and then plead ignorance, the one time it gets embarrassing. He's saying you built a system designed to squeeze margins, and you're only shocked now because a 4-year-old almost got sick and there were witnesses." The room was quiet, and Michael felt the accusation land somewhere it wasn't supposed to be able to reach, because the terrible thing about a good lie is that it always contains a splinter of something true. He hadn't known. He would have bet his life he hadn't known. But he had walked away from the day-to-day. He had trusted people and stopped checking. He had let a satisfaction score of 99.4% sit in a report for who knew how many quarters before he finally opened one at 11 at night and noticed. "Is he right?" Michael said quietly. "Not about the crime. About the not knowing. Should I have known sooner?" Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "You want the honest answer, or the one that makes you feel better?" "You know which one I want." "Yeah, you should have known sooner." Daniel said it plainly because that was why Michael trusted him. "You stepped back 4 years ago, and you had good reasons, and I'd have done the same thing with a kid at home. But you built a company on the idea that people get treated right, and then you stopped walking the floors, and a system doesn't hold itself to a promise, Michael. People do. And the day you stopped watching, some of those people decided the promise was optional." He shook his head. "But here's the part Brooks's lawyer is betting you won't understand. Knowing sooner would have been better. Absolutely. But you're the guy who opened the report at 11 at night when you didn't have to. You're the guy who came here with a coffee stain instead of sending a memo. 99 out of 100 owners get that report and see a perfect score and feel good about it and go to bed. You saw a perfect score and got suspicious. That instinct is the only reason we're standing here. So don't let a man who sold rotten fruit to a nursing mother make you feel guilty for the 4 years you spent raising a little girl. Michael was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said finally. Then let's make sure he can't hide behind me. If he's got records, I want our records to be cleaner. I want every instruction that ever went from corporate to this location, and I want it before his lawyer can spin the ones he's got. Already pulling it. And Daniel. Michael looked up. If it turns out somebody above Brooks was involved, somebody in corporate, somebody I trusted. I want to know that too. Even if it's ugly. Especially if it's ugly. I'm not going to be the guy who cleans out the storage room and protects the corner office. Daniel nodded slowly. You might not like where it goes. I already don't like where it went, Michael said. That ship sailed at 2 in the morning 3 nights ago. Just find me the truth. It took Daniel's team 4 hours. And in those 4 hours, Michael did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He didn't sit in the conference room and wait for reports. He went back out into the main floor of the lounge, the beautiful one, the leather chairs and the jazz, and he started talking to the servers, the ones who worked the front, the comfortable side. I wanted to know something that had been eating at him since the moment the doors slid open that morning. He wanted to know whether the people on the good side had known about the bad side, whether the whole staff was in on it, or whether the wall Rachel built had been so good, it even kept the workers from seeing each other. The answer, it turned out, was both, and it broke his heart in a new way. A front-of-house server named Marcus, maybe 30, sat across from Michael at one of the good tables and turned a coffee cup around and around in his hands. I knew there was a back room, Marcus said. Everybody knew there was a back room, but we were told it was for guests who wanted quiet. Overflow, and they kept us separate. Front staff never went back there. Back staff never came up front. Rachel ran the schedules that way on purpose. I see that now. So I knew there was a room. I didn't know what was in it. He looked up miserable. But here's the thing I keep thinking about, Mr. Carter. I never asked. Not once in 2 years did I walk back there and open that door and just look. And I could have. Any day. I just didn't because I was up here where it was nice and the tips were good, and asking questions felt like a good way to lose a good spot. He set the cup down. So maybe I didn't know, but I didn't want to know. And I'm not sure those are all that different. Michael looked at this young man, having the worst realization of his working life, and he felt an unexpected tenderness, because it was the same realization the man in the suit had had over Leo's fruit cup, and it was in a smaller and more forgivable way, the same realization Michael himself had had at his kitchen table. I didn't know, but I stopped looking. And a promise you stop watching is a promise you've already started to break. Marcus, Michael said. You want to make it right? Yes, sir. I don't know how, but yes. Then here's how. Michael leaned forward. When we reopen this place, there's no front room and back room anymore. It's one room. Everybody in it gets treated the same. And the way I'm going to make sure that sticks isn't cameras or audits, though we'll have those. It's people like you who now know exactly what it feels like to find out you looked away. You're going to be the guy who opens the door and looks every single day, whether anybody's making you or not, because you already know what happens when nobody does. He stood. Can you be that guy? Marcus stood too fast. Yes, sir. Good. Because Clara's your new manager, and she's going to need people who look. Marcus blinked. Clara from the back. She's the manager now. She's the manager now. And Michael watched Marcus absorb that. Watched him understand that the woman who'd been serving spoiled sandwiches in a storage closet 8 months into the job was now his boss. And he watched Marcus decide visibly to be okay with it, which told Michael something good about Marcus. At 3:15 that afternoon, Daniel came and found Michael on the main floor, and his face had the grim look again, and this time it was worse. We found where it goes above Brooks, Daniel said low. Michael's stomach tightened. Who? Not who you're afraid of. Not one of your executives. It's the vendor. Daniel pulled up something on the tablet. The cheap food, the stuff that got served in the back, it all came from one supplier. A company called Fresh Point Distribution, and Brooks was buying from them out of that petty cash slush fund. But when we pulled Fresh Point's ownership records, He turned the tablet around. Guess whose name is on the incorporation? Michael looked. And for a second he couldn't make sense of it because the name on the screen didn't belong to David Brooks or to some faceless corporate villain. It belonged to Rachel Monroe's brother. Fresh Point is owned by Kevin Monroe, Daniel said. Rachel's brother, which means when Rachel told you an hour ago that she didn't take the money that David and a guy at the vendor ran the cash side, that was technically true. She didn't take a paycheck from the scheme. Her brother did. And she was the one who made sure her brother's garbage food got served to your guests, and made sure her brother's company got paid, and made sure nobody up front ever looked hard enough to notice the invoices came from a company with her own last name on it. Michael sat down. Because this changed everything about Rachel, and it changed it in the worst possible direction. He'd spent the morning building a picture of her as a manager who'd gotten corrupted. Someone who took an envelope to look the other way, weak rather than wicked. The kind of person who tells herself a lot of things. He'd almost felt sorry for her. But this wasn't looking the other way. This was building the machine. This was a woman who'd set up a family business to feed her own airport lounge spoiled food, who'd designed the entire two-room system specifically, so her brother's product could be dumped on the people least likely to complain, who'd taken an envelope from David Brooks as cover, so that on paper the money never touched her. She hadn't been corrupted by the scheme. She was the scheme. Get her back in here, Michael said quietly. They brought Rachel back to the windowless conference room, and she came in wary because she'd already given her statement, and she thought she understood the shape of her situation, and she did not yet know that the ground had just opened up beneath her. Sit down, Michael said. She sat. Rachel, an hour ago, you told me you didn't take any money, that David and a guy at the vendor ran the cash. You want to stand by that? It's the truth, she said, and there was still that flat, drained quality to her, the performance long gone. I never took a dime from the food side. You can look at my accounts. I never, Kevin, Michael said, and he watched her face come apart. It was a different kind of coming apart than the horror in the storage room that morning. That had been the horror of getting caught. This was the horror of realizing that the one thing she'd been protecting all day, the thing she'd been steering everyone toward. David and the vendor always. David and the vendor had a name she'd never said out loud, and now Michael was saying it. Kevin's not, she started. Kevin Monroe, your brother, owner of Fresh Point Distribution, which is the vendor. Which means when you kept saying the vendor all day, like it was some stranger, you were talking about your brother's company, and every time you steered me toward David, you were steering me away from Kevin. Michael's voice was very level and very cold. You didn't take a paycheck because you didn't need one. The money went to your family, and you built the entire two-room system to keep that family business fed. That's not a manager who got corrupted, Rachel. That's the person who designed the whole thing. Rachel was crying now, but she was also. Michael saw, still calculating, even now, even in this, because that was who she was. That was the thing that had let her run a storage room full of expired food for 8 months and sleep at night. Kevin's got 2 kids, she said. His company was going under. He came to me, and he was going to lose the house, and what was I supposed to do? Let my brother's family end up on the street. You've got a daughter. You'd do anything for family. You said so. Yourself an hour ago, you stood right there in that room and told everybody you'd do anything for Emily. Don't. Michael's voice cut so hard that Rachel actually flinched. Don't you put my daughter's name in the same sentence as what you did. The room went silent. You want to talk about family? Michael stood up, and his calm was gone now, or rather, it had turned into something else, something colder and harder. Walt in that room this morning, the veteran with the cap, he told me his wife died 2 years ago, and since then the whole world decided he stopped mattering. He's somebody's family. That nursing mother holding her baby terrified because she thought she'd fed her son poison, she's somebody's family. Ray in the wheelchair, who forgot he was even allowed to be angry about the back room, somebody's family. Every single person you fed rotten food to so your brother could keep his house was somebody's family, Rachel. You didn't choose family over strangers. You chose your family over everybody else's. And then you built a machine to make sure the everybody else never had a face, never had a name, never had a voice loud enough for anyone to hear. Because it's a lot easier to feed spoiled fruit to a category than it is to feed it to Walt. Rachel had nothing. For the first time all day, she truly had nothing. "Here's what's going to happen," Michael said, and he sat back down, and his voice went level again, businesslike, which was somehow more frightening than the anger. "Your statement from this morning stands. Everything you said about David and the substitution and the two-room system, that's documented, and it's accurate, and it's going to prosecutors. And now this Kevin Freshpoint, the family business, that's going to prosecutors too. You're not just losing your job, Rachel. You built a criminal enterprise that endangered public health, and you're going to answer for it in a courtroom, and I am personally going to make sure the company cooperates with every single request that helps them make that case." He paused. "And I want you to understand why. It's not revenge. I don't do revenge. It's a waste of a good afternoon. It's because somewhere out there right now is another Rachel running another lounge, telling herself that the people in the back room don't really matter, and nobody will ever check. And the only way that Rachel ever hears the message is, if this one, the one who got caught, actually pays for it. So you're going to be the message. That's the last useful thing you'll do for this company." Rachel stared at the table. "Can I say one thing?" she said, barely audible. Michael waited. "When you walked in this morning," she said slowly, not looking up, "the coffee stain, the backpack. I looked at you and I thought there's another one. Another person who doesn't matter, who I can put in the back and not worry about." She finally raised her eyes, and there was something almost like wonder in them, horrible and small. "I do that 100 times a day. I've done it 100 times a day for 8 months. And it never once occurred to me that I might be wrong. That any one of them might be—" She gestured weakly at him at the office at the whole collapsed morning. "That's the point," Michael said quietly. "That's the entire point, Rachel. You should treat every single person like they might be the one who owns the building. Not because they might. Because the fact that you'd change your behavior if they did tells you everything about how wrong the behavior was in the first place." He stood. "Daniel will take it from here. We're done." And he walked out of that windowless room, and he did not look back at Rachel Monroe, and he was surprised to find that his hands were shaking, not with anger, but with the sheer weight of a day that had started at a school drop-off and turned into this. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. He'd been at the airport for nearly 10 hours, and he still had one phone call left to make, the one he'd been putting off all day, the one he'd been dreading more than David Brooks's lawyer, or Rachel's confession, or any of it, because it was the only call that actually mattered to him. He stepped into an empty corridor, pulled out his phone, and called his daughter. The after-school program answered, and there was a shuffle, and then a small, bright voice came on the line that undid something in Michael's chest that had been clenched all day. "Daddy. Hey, Bug. Did you get on your airplane?" Michael looked back down the corridor toward the storage room that wasn't going to be a storage room anymore, toward the conference room, where Daniel was building a criminal case, toward the main floor, where Marcus had promised to be the guy who opens the door and looks. "No, baby," he said. "I didn't get on the airplane. Something came up here, and I had to stay and take care of it." "Is it a big problem?" "It was a pretty big problem, yeah." "Did you fix it?" And Michael Carter stood in an empty airport corridor, with his daughter's pink Fox backpack still hanging off his shoulder. 10 hours into the worst and most important day his company had ever had, and he thought about Walt's salute and Clara's smile, and the paramedic saying he's fine, and the wall he was going to tear down to the studs, and he thought about the promise he'd made. A curious little girl a year ago, that he'd finally today, at a terrible cost, started to actually keep. "I'm fixing it, Bug," he said, and his voice was thick. "I'm still fixing it, but yeah, I'm going to fix it." "Good," Emily said with the total confidence of an 8-year-old who has never once doubted her father. "You fix everything." Michael closed his eyes. "I'm going to try to be home tonight," he said. "It might be late, but I'm going to try. Bring the book. Cross my heart. You be good, Daddy. You be good, Bug." He hung up, and he stood there for a second, and then he wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he squared his shoulders, and he walked back toward the conference room, because the day wasn't over, and there was a difference between a man who says he'll fix everything and a man who actually stays until it's fixed. And Emily's whole understanding of her father of the world of whether promises meant anything depended on Michael being the second kind. Daniel looked up when he came back in. "You good?" Daniel asked. "No," Michael said honestly. "But I'm here. What's next?" And Daniel almost smiled, because that was the most Michael Carter answer there was. "Next," Daniel said, "you're going to want to sit down, because Brooks's lawyer just called back, and he's got a new offer, and you're not going to believe who he says will testify." Michael sat down. "Who?" he said. "Clara," Daniel said. "Brooks's lawyer says he's got a witness who'll testify that the food safety complaints were fabricated, that a disgruntled junior employee made them up to get managers in trouble because she wanted a promotion she didn't earn, and that witness is Clara Reyes." Daniel set the phone down. "He's going to put your new manager on the stand and paint her as a liar who invented the whole thing. And if a jury believes it, the whole substitution case starts looking like a workplace grudge instead of a crime." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a witness," he said finally. "That's a threat. He's not saying Clara will testify for him. He's saying if I don't back off, he'll come after Clara, destroy her credibility, drag her name through a courtroom, and since she's the one who actually filed the reports, he can make her the story instead of the food." "That's exactly what it is," Daniel said. "And it might work, Michael. She's 23. She's got no record of anything good or bad. She's just a kid who filed 4 complaints. His lawyer can make ambitious young employee wanted her boss's job sound awfully plausible to a jury, especially now that you actually gave her the boss's job." And there it was. The trap clean and vicious. Michael had promoted Clara that morning out of gratitude and instinct and a belief that she'd earned it, and by doing it the same day, he'd handed Brooks's lawyer the exact motive he needed. She lied about the food, got her manager fired, and walked right into the manager's job. Look how fast. Look how convenient. Michael felt the anger rise, and then he made himself set it down, because anger was what the lawyer wanted. "Anger made you sloppy. Get Clara in here," he said. "She needs to hear this from us before she hears it in a deposition, and she needs to hear it today. Michael, if we tell her they're going to try to destroy her, then she'll be scared. Yeah. But she'll be scared and prepared instead of scared and blindsided, and there's a world of difference. I'm not going to protect her by keeping her in the dark. That's what Rachel did to this whole company, kept everybody in the dark to protect them, and look how that turned out." He shook his head. "No more dark rooms. Get her." Clara came in 10 minutes later, and Michael could see the fear arrive on her face before she even sat down. Because getting called into a windowless conference room with the founder and the compliance chief is never good news, and she'd had a lifetime of learning that. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. "No," Michael said immediately. "Sit down. You're not in trouble. But I'm going to tell you something hard, and I'm going to tell you straight, because you've earned straight." He waited until she sat. "David Brooks's lawyer is going to try to say you made up the complaints, that you invented the whole thing to get Rachel fired so you could take her job. And they're going to point at the fact that I promoted you this morning as proof." The blood drained out of Clara's face. "But I didn't," she said. "You know I didn't. The reports are real, the food was real, the Mr. Carter, I didn't make anything up. I know. If they say that if they put me up there and say I'm a liar, I'll—" Her voice climbed. "I can't have that. I've got my brother. I've got a record now that says I'm honest. If some lawyer stands up in a courtroom and says, I made up food poisoning to steal a job." She stopped. Her hands were shaking. "People will believe it. That's how it works. They always believe the worst about people like me. That's the whole thing I learned working here. Nobody listens to the person in the back." And Michael watched an old wound tear open in her. The same wound the whole storage room carried the belief that the world was built to disbelieve you. And he understood that Brooks's lawyer hadn't just found a legal strategy. He'd found the exact fear that Clara had been living with her entire adult life, and he was going to press on it. "Clara," Michael said, "look at me. I read your reports at 11 o'clock at night 3 days ago, before I knew your name, before you knew mine, before there was any job to steal. You filed those complaints when there was nothing in it for you except getting labeled a problem and probably getting cut. You told me that yourself this morning, Rachel warned you you'd be first out the door, and you filed the fourth report anyway. Does that sound like somebody working an angle for a promotion? Or does that sound like somebody who couldn't stand to watch people get hurt? It doesn't matter what it sounds like to you, Clara said, and there was despair in it. It matters what it sounds like to a jury. Then let's make sure it sounds true to a jury, Michael said, because it is true. And truth has one advantage that a lie doesn't, Clara. It's got a paper trail that was written before anybody needed it to say anything. He turned to Daniel. The complaint logs. What are the timestamps? Daniel was already there. Each report is time-stamped when it was filed. Server side can't be altered. First one is, he checked about 7 weeks ago. Second one 5 weeks. Third 3 weeks. Fourth 11 days ago. And when did I promote her? This morning, 9:42 a.m. So the last complaint was filed 11 days before there was any promotion, any Rachel getting fired, any of it. Before I'd ever even opened the report. Michael turned back to Clara. You didn't file those complaints to get a job. You filed them when the only thing they could get you was trouble, and the timestamps prove it down to the minute. Brooks's lawyer can stand up and say whatever he wants, but he can't move a timestamp. And a jury can count backwards on a calendar just as well as anybody. Clara stared at him. The despair on her face didn't vanish, but something shifted underneath it. A small, fragile thing. Hope, maybe. Or the first crack of a belief she'd carried her whole life, starting to give way. The belief that being in the back meant never being believed. You're saying the reports defend themselves, she said slowly. I'm saying you defended yourself 7 weeks ago and 11 days ago, and you didn't even know you were doing it. Every time you filed one of those and hit send, you were building the case that you're honest. You just didn't know anybody would ever read them. Michael leaned forward. But here's the part I need you to actually hear because it matters more than the timestamps. If this goes to trial, they might still try to put you on that stand. And it'll be ugly. A lawyer whose whole job is to make you look bad is going to ask you questions designed to rattle you. And you're going to be scared. I'm not going to pretend you won't be. He paused. But you will not be alone up there. This company's lawyers will be sitting right behind you. I will be sitting in that courtroom. And every person who was in that back room this morning, Walt Ray, that mother, they saw the food. They smelled it. They lived it. You're not the only witness anymore, Clara. That's what changed today. This morning, you were one person screaming into a wall. Now there's a whole room full of people who'll stand up and say the wall was real. Clara put her hand over her mouth. And this time when the tears came, Michael recognized them. They were the same tears from the storage room. The tears of someone who spent a long time certain they'd face the worst alone, finding out they wouldn't. Okay, she whispered. Okay. You still want the job? Michael asked gently. Because I'll understand if you don't. It just got a lot harder than it was at 9:42 this morning. Clara wiped her face. And then she did something that told Michael everything he needed to know about whether he'd chosen right. Yeah, she said. I want the job, because if I quit now, that lawyer gets to be right. He gets to say I ran because I was guilty, and I'm not running. She lifted her chin, and for the first time all day, she didn't look at the door to check if Rachel was watching because Rachel wasn't anywhere anymore. I filed those reports because it was right. I'll say so in a courtroom because it's right. Let him try to make me the liar. The food was rotten. I'm not. Daniel let out a low whistle. Michael, I think you hired the right manager. I know I did, Michael said. It was 4:40 in the afternoon when Brooks's lawyer called the third time, and this time, Michael took the call himself. He put it on speaker so Daniel could hear, and he sat back in his chair, and a smooth, confident voice filled the conference room. Mr. Carter, I'm glad we could connect directly. I think we both want the same thing here, which is to make this go away quietly. My client is willing to resign, sign a full non-disclosure, and walk away with no fuss in exchange for the company declining to pursue criminal charges and a modest severance to reflect his years of service. I think you'll agree that's the cleanest outcome for everyone. A public case is messy. There are witnesses whose credibility won't survive scrutiny. There are questions about what corporate knew and when. Do we really want all that in the record? Michael let the silence sit for a second. "Counselor," he said, "can I tell you what I think you're actually offering?" "By all means." "You're offering to not destroy a 23-year-old server named Clara Reyes if I agree to let a man who sold rotten food to a 4-year-old walk away with a check. That's the offer. You dressed it up nice, but that's the transaction underneath it." Michael's voice was flat and calm. "And I want to make sure I understand it because I want to be precise when I say no." There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Carter, I'd caution you against. Here's what you don't know, counselor. Because you're working off what your client told you, and your client is a liar, so you're working off bad information." Michael leaned toward the phone. "You think Clara's the weak point. The junior employee, the fabricated complaint angle, the promotion that looks convenient. And on paper, sitting in your office, I'm sure that looked like a real strategy. But her complaints are server time-stamped, the last one, 11 days before there was any promotion to want, and a jury can count backwards on a calendar. So that whole line of attack falls apart the second you put it in front of a person who owns a calendar." He paused. "But that's not even the part you're going to want to know about." "And what part is that?" "Fresh point distribution," Michael said. The silence on the line changed. Michael could hear it change. It went from the confident silence of a man running a play to the still careful silence of a man who has just realized he doesn't have all the cards. "I don't," the lawyer started. "The vendor your client bought the cheap food from, Fresh Point. You should ask your client who owns it. And when he tells you it's Kevin Monroe, you should ask him who Kevin Monroe's sister is. And when he tells you it's Rachel Monroe, the lounge director, you should ask yourself whether your client who's been telling you he was a scapegoat following orders from corporate maybe forgot to mention that the whole substitution scheme was built to funnel money to the lounge director's brother's company. Because that changes your client from a middle manager following instructions into a co-conspirator in a family scheme. And that's not the kind of thing a jury forgives, and it's not the kind of thing an NDA can bury, and it is definitely not the kind of thing I'm going to trade away to protect a 23-year-old who doesn't need protecting because she was right all along." Michael's voice never rose. "So here's my counteroffer, counselor. There isn't one. Your client can plead, or he can go to trial, but he's going to do it with the truth on the table, all of it, because I've got a forensic team that's already found it, and I'm not in the business of unfinding the truth to make an afternoon easier. Do we understand each other?" The line was quiet for a long moment. "I'll need to speak with my client," the lawyer said, and all the smoothness was gone. "You do that," Michael said, and hung up. Daniel let out a breath. "He didn't know about Kevin." "No," Michael said. "Brooks kept it from his own lawyer, which tells you Brooks knows exactly how bad the Kevin connection is. You don't hide the thing that helps you." He rubbed his face. "He was hoping he could scare me off with the Clara threat before anybody connected the vendor to Rachel's family. He almost had the timing right. Another day, and that offer might have come before we found Fresh Point." "Would you have taken it if we hadn't found Kevin yet to protect Clara?" Michael was quiet. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the honest answer. If the only way to keep a lawyer from destroying that kid was to let Brooks walk, I want to tell you I'd have found another way. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out, because the truth showed up first, and the truth is the only thing that protects Clara and gets Brooks and doesn't make me choose between them." He looked at Daniel. "That's the thing people never understand about doing it right. It's not that doing it right always wins. It's that doing it right gives the truth time to show up. And when the truth shows up, you don't have to choose anymore." It was after 5 now, and Michael had been at the airport for 11 hours, and the day should have been winding down. But there was one more thing, and it was the thing Daniel had been not quite saying all afternoon, hovering at the edges, and Michael finally decided to pull it into the open. "Daniel, you said this morning you might find something above Brooks, something in corporate. You said I might not like where it goes." Michael looked at him steadily. "Did you find it?" Daniel didn't answer right away, and that was answer enough. "Tell me," Michael said. "There's a regional director," Daniel said slowly. "Gerald Pace. He oversees 12 locations, including Denver. And for the last 3 quarters, Denver's had the best margins in his whole region. Best food cost numbers of any lounge he manages by a wide margin. And he's been holding Denver up in his quarterly reviews as the model, the example. Look how Denver's controlling costs, why can't the rest of you? Daniel paused. Michael, the reason Denver's food costs looked so good is that they were serving garbage and selling the good stuff out the back. Those beautiful margins Gerald Pace has been bragging about for 9 months, that's the fraud. That's what fraud looks like on a spreadsheet. It looks like a manager who found a way to cut costs. Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. So did Pace know, he asked. Or did he just see good numbers and not ask? That, Daniel said, is the $200,000 question, because I can't prove he knew. There's no email, no text, nothing that says Gerald Pace understood where the margins came from. But Daniel leaned forward. A regional director, whose whole job is to understand his locations, had the single best food cost outlier in his entire region, held it up as a model for 9 months, and never once drove out to Denver to figure out how they did it. Never asked, never looked. And Michael, that's the same thing Marcus told you about the back room. That's the same thing you said about yourself at your own kitchen table. I didn't know, but I stopped looking. A promise you stop watching is a promise you've already started to break. Michael finished quietly. The two men sat with it. Because this was the real reckoning, and Michael had known it was coming since the moment he'd opened that report at 11 at night. It was easy to be furious at David Brooks, who forged logs and pocketed cash. It was easy to be furious at Rachel, who built the machine to feed her brother. Those were villains. Villains were almost a relief because you could point at them. But Gerald Pace wasn't a villain. Gerald Pace was something more common and more dangerous. He was a man who saw a number that was too good to be true and chose to enjoy it instead of question it. He was the whole comfortable front room of the company in a single person. And the honest, terrible truth was that Michael had been Gerald Pace too for 4 years at his kitchen table in every quarter he didn't open the report. What do I do with him? Michael said. It wasn't really a question. It was the weight of the thing spoken out loud. Legally, probably nothing. You can't prosecute a man for not being curious. Daniel spread his hands. But you're not just deciding a legal question, Michael. You're deciding what kind of company this is going to be when it reopens. And that's a harder call than Brooks or Rachel, because with them, the answer's obvious. Pace is where you decide whether I didn't know is a defense in your company or not. Michael stood up. He walked to the far end of the little room and stood there for a moment with his back to Daniel, and he thought about Emily asking, "Did you fix it?" And he thought about the promise he'd made to a curious 8-year-old that he built places where people got treated right, and he thought about what it would mean to fire a man who'd committed no crime except comfort, and what it would mean not to. He doesn't get fired, Michael said, finally turning around. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Not because he didn't do anything wrong. He did. He got handed the best numbers in his region, and he treated it like a gift instead of a question. And that comfort is exactly how a Rachel gets away with it for 8 months. So he doesn't get to keep enjoying the comfortable version of his job. Michael's voice hardened into something clear and certain. Here's what happens to Gerald Pace. He personally leads the audit of the other 11 locations in his region. Every one. In person. He opens every back door himself, and looks in every quiet room himself, and tastes the food himself, and he writes me a report on each one, and he signs it. Because the punishment for not looking isn't getting fired. The punishment for not looking is that from now on, looking is your entire job. And if he finds another Denver in his region, and Daniel, I'd bet money he does, then he gets to be the one who fixes it. He gets to feel exactly what it feels like to walk into a storage room and see what comfort was hiding, every day, until he never stops looking again. Daniel was quiet for a second, and then something like admiration crossed his face. That's harsher than firing him, he said. It's supposed to be, Michael said. Firing him lets him leave and tell himself he was a scapegoat. This makes him the guy who has to see it. There's no scapegoat story that survives you personally pulling a spoiled sandwich out of a cooler in Kansas City. He sat back down, suddenly exhausted. And if he can't do it, if he leads that audit and finds another Denver and tries to bury it, then he's not Gerald Pace who didn't look. He's Gerald Pace who looked and lied, and that's a firing and a fast one. I'm giving him the one thing Rachel and Brooks never gave anybody. A chance to be better once they know. But it's a chance with his eyes forced open. That's the deal. Daniel nodded slowly and made a note. I'll set it up. He's going to hate you. Good, Michael said. Let him hate me from inside a walk-in cooler in Omaha, where he can see exactly what his good margins bought. It was 5:30. The forensic team was still working. Brooks's lawyer hadn't called back. Rachel was gone. Clara was down on the floor learning her new job with Marcus at her shoulder. And Michael Carter sat in a windowless conference room 11.5 hours into the longest day of his professional life, with his daughter's pink Fox backpack sitting on the table in front of him where he'd finally set it down, and he realized he'd been running on nothing since the school drop-off that morning. He picked up the backpack. He unzipped the front pocket half looking for a granola bar Emily sometimes stashed there, and instead his fingers found a folded piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a drawing. Crayon. An 8-year-old's drawing of a stick figure man in an airport with a big smiling airplane, and over the man's head, in Emily's careful wobbly letters, she'd written, "My dad helps people." Michael sat there and looked at it for a long time. And then Daniel's phone rang, and Daniel answered and listened, and his face changed, and he lowered the phone slowly and looked at Michael with an expression Michael couldn't read at all. "That was the DA's office," Daniel said. "Somebody already called them. Before us. This morning. Someone reported the whole scheme, the food, the cooler, the substitutions to the district attorney at 9:15 this morning. Before you ever knocked that sandwich out of Walt's hand." Michael went still. 9:15. That's before the audit team even got here. Before I'd said a word to anybody in that lounge. He frowned. Who called them? Who knew at 9:15? That's the thing, Daniel said slowly. The DA won't say who. Anonymous tip. But they said something else. They said the caller told them to expect a man named Michael Carter to walk into the Denver lounge this morning, and that whatever happened, the company was going to try to make it right. He set the phone down. Michael, somebody knew you were coming. Somebody knew your plan. And they called the DA before you even walked in the door. Michael stared at the phone in Daniel's hand. Somebody knew, he said slowly. But that's not possible. I told 2 people this plan. I told you, and I told myself in a mirror. That's it. No email, no memo. That was the whole point. I didn't want anyone to have 3 days to clean up. I know, Daniel said. Which is why I don't understand it either. The only people who knew you were coming to Denver this morning with a plan were the 2 of us. And I didn't call the DA at 9:15. I was on a plane at 9:15. The 2 men looked at each other in the windowless room, and for a moment, the whole day tilted sideways because if someone had known Michael's secret plan before, he'd even walked in the door. Then, everything Michael thought he understood about how this morning had unfolded was wrong. And then Michael went very still, because a piece of it moved into place, and it was a piece he did not want to be true. Daniel, he said. The report. The quarterly report I opened at 11 at night 3 days ago. The one with the 99.4 satisfaction score and the buried complaints. He spoke slowly, working it out as he said it. I didn't go looking for that report. It came to me. It was flagged. Somebody in the system pushed it to the top of my queue with a note that said I should review it personally. He looked up. I never thought about who. I just assumed it was automated. But reports don't flag themselves for the chairman's personal attention. A person does that. Daniel's eyes widened. Somebody wanted you to find it. Somebody wanted me to find it, Michael repeated. Somebody inside this company knew exactly what was happening in Denver, couldn't stop it, themselves, couldn't get anyone to listen, and pushed the one report to the one person who might actually come. And then this morning, when they figured out I'd taken the bait and was walking in the door, they called the DA. To make sure that even if I got scared, even if Brooks's lawyers spooked me, even if I decided to handle it quietly, it was already out, already reported, already too big to bury. Michael sat back. They didn't trust me to finish it, so they made sure I couldn't back out even if I wanted to. Who? Daniel said. Who has access to flag reports to the chairman and knew enough to call the DA, Michael was quiet for a long moment. And then slowly, he pulled the pink fox backpack toward him across the table, and he looked at the crayon drawing still sitting beside it. My dad helps people. And something occurred to him that made his throat tighten. Clara said something this morning, he said. In the storage room. She said she filed 4 reports and Rachel told her they went into a folder nobody read. That she was screaming into a wall. Michael looked up. But somebody read them, Daniel. Before me. Somebody in this company read. Clara's 4 reports understood what they meant and couldn't do anything about it directly because they didn't have the power, so they did the only thing they could. They took Clara's reports and they attached them to a quarterly summary, and they flagged the whole package for the one person with enough power to actually walk in and end it. He stood up slowly. It wasn't an anonymous whistleblower who knew my plan. It was somebody who made my plan happen. Somebody who lit the fuse 3 days ago and then stood back and prayed I was the man they thought I was. It was 5:45 in the afternoon, and Michael Carter walked out of that conference room to go find out who had trusted him enough to bet everything on his showing up. He found the answer on the main floor, and it wasn't who he expected, and it undid him a little. It was Marcus, the front-of-house server. The one who'd told Michael that morning he'd known there was a back room and never opened the door. The one who'd said I didn't know, but I didn't want to know, and I'm not sure those are different. Michael found him refilling a coffee station, and he stood there for a second, and Marcus felt him watching and turned around. Mr. Carter. Marcus. Michael kept his voice quiet. This morning you told me you never opened that back door. You told me you didn't want to know, and I believed you because you looked like a man telling the truth. He paused. But you did open it, didn't you? At least once. And you did know. And this morning you looked me in the eye and told me you didn't, because you were scared of what would happen if anybody found out what you'd already done. Marcus went pale, and his hand froze on the coffee carafe, and for a second Michael thought he was going to deny it. And then the young man's shoulders came down, and something in his face let go. How did you know? Marcus said. I didn't. Not until 2 minutes ago. Michael pulled out a chair at the nearest table and sat down, and he gestured for Marcus to sit too, and after a moment, Marcus did. Somebody flagged a report to me 3 days ago, attached Clara's complaints to it, and pushed it up to the chairman with a note saying I should look personally. And this morning somebody called the district attorney and told them I was coming, and that the company would try to make it right before I'd walked in the door. 2 people in this whole company could have connected those dots. One of them's in a wheelchair in Chicago by now. The other one is holding a coffee pot and lying to my face about whether he ever opened a door. Michael looked at him steadily. It was you, Marcus. You did open it. You saw what was back there. And instead of doing nothing, and instead of blowing it up in a way that'd get you fired before anything changed, you found a quieter way. You got the reports in front of me. Marcus set the coffee pot down. His hands were shaking. I opened it once, he said. About 6 weeks ago. A guy from the back, one of the kitchen guys, he quit, and on his way out he told me, he said, you should see what they're serving back there, man. You should really see it. And I didn't believe him. So that night after close I went and looked. In the cooler. Marcus swallowed. It was 51 degrees. I didn't have a thermometer. I opened it and it wasn't cold. And there was fruit in there, cups of it, dated 3 weeks back, and it was still on the serving cart for the next morning. And sandwiches with the premium labels peeled off and cheap ones underneath. His voice cracked. And I closed the door, and I went home, and I didn't sleep, because I realized every morning I'd been up front pouring espresso for guys in nice suits. There'd been people 50 feet away eating that. And you didn't report it, Michael said. Not an accusation, just laying it down. I couldn't. Marcus looked up, desperate to be understood. You don't get it, Mr. Carter. You weren't here. You didn't see how it worked. Rachel controlled everything. Every complaint went to her and died. I watched it happen to Clara 4 times. I watched that girl file something, and I watched Rachel close it, and I watched Clara get quieter and quieter. If I'd filed a report, it goes to Rachel. Rachel closes it, and now I'm marked, and I lose the one good job I've got, and nothing changes. Nothing. He shook his head hard. So I did the only thing I could think of. I found Clara's reports in the system. I've got low-level access, just enough to see the log, and I couldn't make anyone act on them. But I could attach them to something that would go up the chain automatically. The quarterly summary. It gets compiled and sent up. So I attached her 4 reports to it, and I added a flag that said, "Recommend Chairman Review," and I hit send, and I told myself it was probably going to disappear like everything else. His eyes filled. And then, 3 days later, I heard through a friend in scheduling that the chairman had pulled Denver's file and was asking questions. And I knew you'd seen it. And I've been sick to my stomach for 3 days, waiting to find out if you were the kind of man who'd come or the kind who'd send a memo. Michael sat there and looked at this young man who 12 hours ago he'd half written off as a bystander who looked the other way. "And the DA," Michael said quietly. "This morning, when I saw you walk in," Marcus's voice broke completely. "When I saw you with the coffee stain and the little backpack walking to the front desk, I knew what you were doing. You came in disguised. You came to see it for yourself. And I got scared because I thought, what if they scare him off? What if Rachel's smart? What if Brooks lawyers up fast? What if the man loses his nerve and it all gets settled quiet and buried, and everybody in that back room stays in that back room forever?" Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand. "So I stepped into the supply closet, and I called the DA's office, and I told them everything I knew, and I told them a man named Michael Carter was walking into the Denver lounge right now, and whatever happened, he was going to try to make it right. Because I figured if it's already reported, if the DA already knows, then it can't get buried. Not even by you. Not even if you turned out to be somebody I was wrong about." He looked up, and there was terror in his eyes, the terror of a man who'd gambled everything and was about to find out if he'd lost. "I went over your head, Mr. Carter. I called the law on your company before you'd even fixed it. I didn't trust you to finish it. So if you're going to fire me, I understand. I'd probably fire me too." And Michael Carter looked at Marcus for a long, long moment. And then he did something that made every server on the floor stop and stare. He stood up, and he reached across the table, and he took Marcus's hand in both of his, and he shook it hard, the way you shake the hand of a man who just did something brave. "You didn't go over my head," Michael said, and his voice was thick. "You did my job for me before I even knew it needed doing. You want to know the truth, Marcus? I stepped back from this company 4 years ago. Good reasons. I've got a little girl, but I stepped back and I stopped walking the floors. And a promise you stop watching is a promise you start to break. So while I was home learning to braid hair and pack school lunches, the promise broke. Right here. And the reason it didn't stay broken isn't me. It's you. A front-of-house server making 30 grand a year who opened a door he was told not to open, who found a way to get 4 buried reports in front of the one person who could act, and who cared so much about the people in that back room that he was willing to call the law on his own boss rather than let it get swept away. Michael's eyes were wet now openly. "You didn't fail to trust me. You made sure the right thing happened even if I failed. That's not disloyalty, son. That's the highest kind of loyalty there is. Loyalty to the thing that matters instead of the man in charge." Marcus stared at him, and his face crumpled, and he put his free hand over his eyes, and Michael held on to his hand and let him. "I thought you were going to fire me," Marcus whispered. "Fire you?" Michael let out a rough laugh. "Marcus, I'm going to build a whole system around what you did. Every Skyhaven lounge in this company is going to have a way for a person like you to get a report to a person like me without it dying on some manager's desk. I'm going to call it..." He thought for a second. "I don't know what I'm going to call it, but it's going to exist because of you. Because you proved that the only thing standing between a buried complaint and the truth is one person with a low-level login and enough guts to hit send." He squeezed the young man's hand one more time and let it go. "You're not fired. You just got promoted, same as Clara, and the two of you are going to run this floor together. And the first thing you're going to do is make sure there's never another back room in this building or any other." It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and Michael Carter had been at that airport for 12 hours, and he'd found the fraud and closed the lounge and gotten Brooks arrested, and Rachel confessing, and Clara promoted, and now he'd found the last piece, the frightened, brave young man who'd lit the whole fuse and prayed, and he was so tired he could barely stand. But there was one thing left. And it wasn't business. It was the only thing that had ever mattered. He picked up the pink fox backpack. He put the crayon drawing carefully back in the front pocket. And he called the after-school program and told them he was on his way. He'd be a little late, but he was coming, and he got in his car, and he drove. 6 weeks passed. And on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, the Skyhaven Executive Lounge at Denver International reopened its doors. There was no back room. Michael had stood in that converted storage closet himself the week before with a demolition crew, and he'd put his own hand on the sledgehammer, and he'd taken the first swing at the wall that separated the front from the back. And when the wall came down, the whole space opened into one room, and Michael had stood in the dust and the light and thought there. That's the whole thing. That's what I promised Emily. One room. Everybody in it. The chairs were all the same now. The good leather ones everywhere. The menu was one menu. The food came from a new vendor with a clean record and a temperature log that texted an alert to 3 separate managers if the cooler drifted a single degree. And on the wall by the entrance where you couldn't miss it. Walking in there was a small brass plaque, and it didn't have Michael's name on it. It had 4 words, and Michael had chosen them himself. Everyone here is somebody. Clara Reyes ran the floor now, and she ran it like a woman who remembered exactly what the back room felt like, which she was. Marcus ran it beside her. And there was a new system in every Skyhaven lounge in the country. Michael had built it in 6 weeks working nights where any employee at any level could send a report straight to the chairman's desk, and it could not be intercepted, could not be closed by a manager, could not die in a folder. Michael read everyone himself. He'd promised he would. He kept his promises now in a way he hadn't for 4 years because he'd learned at a terrible cost exactly what happened when he stopped. David Brooks pled guilty. The Fresh Point scheme. Once the forensic team laid it all out was too complete to fight the invoices, the cash deposits, the family connection. Rachel's own recorded confession. He went to prison. Not for long, these things go, but long enough that he'd carry it, and he lost the profession, and he lost the ability to ever again stand in a kitchen and decide whose food got switched. Rachel Monroe pled too. Her brother Kevin's company was dissolved, the assets seized to pay restitution to the guests who'd been harmed. And in the end, the $2,000 a month in envelopes, the whole machine she'd built to keep her brother's house cost her far more than the house was ever worth. Michael thought about her sometimes. He didn't hate her. He'd meant what he said in that windowless room. She was going to be the message, the thing that made the next Rachel somewhere out there think twice. He hoped she'd become something better someday. But he'd stopped needing her to. That was the difference between him now and him at his kitchen table 3 days in. He didn't need the villains to become good for the story to be finished. He just needed the people in the back room to be safe. And they were. Gerald Pace led the audit of his 11 other locations in person, exactly as Michael had ordered. And in Kansas City, he found another Denver smaller, but real manager, cutting food costs by serving day-old product to the guests least likely to complain. Gerald Pace pulled a spoiled tray out of a cooler with his own hands and photographed it and reported it, and he did not bury it, and Michael read the report and understood that the man had in fact learned. Pace kept his job. He was by every account a different kind of manager afterward, the kind who opened doors. And Walter Briggs, the veteran in the cap, came back. He was on the guest list for the reopening. Michael had made sure of it, had personally called and invited him. And when Walt walked through the doors of the new lounge on that Tuesday morning, the first thing he did was look for the back room out of 6 weeks of habit, and there wasn't one, and Michael watched the old man's face as he understood. "Walt," Michael said, crossing to him, "I'm glad you came. Wouldn't have missed it." Walt looked around at the one big room, all the same chairs, the plaque on the wall, and his old eyes were shining. "You did it. You really did it." "Come on," Michael said. "Sit down. Let me get you a coffee. Real coffee, not the machine." And Walt laughed, a real laugh, and he let Michael walk him to one of the good leather chairs. All the chairs were good now, and Michael brought him a coffee himself, the founder of the company carrying a cup across the room to an old veteran, and he sat down across from him, and the two of them talked for an hour, like men who'd been through something together, which they had. Because that was the thing Michael had learned in 12 hours at an airport and 6 weeks of nights. It was never really about the food. The food was just the shape the wrong thing took. The real thing, the thing underneath, was a question so simple a child could ask it, and so hard, a whole company had gotten it wrong. Who counts? Who do you treat like they matter when you think no one important is watching? And the answer. Michael had bled for the answer he was going to spend the rest of his career defending, was that the moment you started sorting people into who counts and who doesn't, you'd already lost the whole thing, no matter how nice the front room looked. That afternoon, Michael brought Emily to see it. School was out, and he picked her up, and he drove her to the airport, and he walked her through the doors of the lounge he'd rebuilt. And Emily, 8 years old, walked into the middle of that one big room and turned around slowly, taking it all in. "This is where you work," she said. "This is one of the places, yeah." She looked at the chairs and the people in them. All kinds of people. An old man and a young mother and a businessman and a woman, reading a paperback, all in the same good chairs, all being brought the same good coffee. And then she looked at the brass plaque on the wall, and she read it slowly, her lips moving. "Everyone here is somebody," she read. She looked up at her father. "Did you write that?" "I did." "Why?" And Michael crouched down, the way he did, so he was under her eye line, so she didn't have to look up at him. "You remember about a year ago," he said, "you asked me what was special about the places I build, and I didn't have a good answer." Emily nodded. "Well, I found the answer," Michael said. "It took me a long time, and it turned out I'd stopped taking care of it, and I had to fix a whole big mess. But I found it. You want to know what's special about the places I build? What? They're places where nobody gets treated like they're less important than anybody else," Michael said. "Not the rich people, not the people in nice clothes, everybody. A person walks in here, and it doesn't matter how much money they've got, or what they're wearing, or whether anybody thinks they're important. They get treated like they matter. Because they do. Every single one of them." He reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "That's what's special about the places I build, Bug. Or at least that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure they are." Emily looked at him with those serious 8-year-old eyes. "Is that why you were late that day?" she asked. "When you didn't get on the airplane?" "Yeah," Michael said softly. "That's exactly why." Emily nodded slowly, like she'd filed it away, and then she reached into her little pocket and pulled out something folded, and she pressed it into his hand. It was another drawing. Fresh crayon. A big room full of stick figures of all different sizes and colors, all of them with smiles, all of them the same size chair. And over the top, in her careful wobbly letters, "My dad's place, where everyone is somebody." Michael looked at it for a long time, and he had to blink hard. "Can I keep this one too?" he asked. "It's for you," Emily said, like it was obvious. And Michael Carter stood up in the middle of the lounge. He'd torn down to the studs and built back right, holding his daughter's drawing in one hand and her small hand in the other. And he looked around at the room full of people. No one had sorted. No one had ranked. No one had pushed into a back room. And he understood that he'd finally built the thing he'd promised her, and the thing he'd promised himself a long time ago on a napkin when he had nothing. That morning, weeks earlier, a manager had looked at his coffee-stained jacket and his daughter's pink backpack and decided he was nobody. And she'd been more right than she knew, because the whole point, the thing worth 12 hours and a criminal case and a wall torn down with his own hands, was that it should never ever matter whether the person walking through the door was somebody or nobody. They should be treated exactly the same either way. A company isn't judged by how it treats the most important person in the room. It's judged by how it treats the person it thinks nobody will ever stand up for. Michael Carter had stood up, and he was never going to sit back down.